Hey folks, welcome back. So the first 2 weeks of season 2 have not exactly gone according to my stellar plan for massive growth and improvement. For those of you who don't know, I also have a slight sideline in doing some video editing work, pretty much exclusively for Craig Petty, and unfortunately that means that every time he goes to the bathroom, he comes out with another idea and I have to spend time editing it. I had a backlog build-up of about 10 different Craig Petty projects that needed editing, and they all came to a head. So I said I'd be putting more vlog footage on the channel, but if I'd done that for the last 2 weeks, it would mostly be footage of a crying fat man sat at a desk, swearing at Craig Petty's face and watching the same clip over and over and over again, and then doing a little dance every so often when a project gets finished. But I'm up to date, I'm caught up, and I'm not going to let a backlog build up again there, so I can focus on the channel now, as well as the editing and the gigs. What that amounts to essentially is that this 12-week year is now a 10-week year. So, I've got to focus. I've discussed in the last video that I've simplified the goals for this year. The interviews will still cover all of the goals for the whole real year, but in the 12-week year, well now the 10-week year, I have simplified the amount of goals that I'm going to get done in that time because I confused myself with the number of goals I set the first time round. In the last video, I said I listed the new goals, and one of them was just to standardly practice and improve close-up magic, but I forgot that I have my AIMC exam coming up, so we're changing that goal to be ready for the AIMC exam. So, on screen now is the list of stuff that I have to do every day. And the goals for the next 10 weeks. I'm going to keep it that simple, but I've got a little chart that I'm going to put next to my bed, and it simply says, did I do enough today for weight loss? Did I do enough this day for all the other goals? So I have to tick off that I've done the daily goals and that I've done enough to satisfy myself on each one of the main goals. Obviously a day where I've got 2 kids' gigs and a wedding, the amount that I need to do for those goals is going to be smaller, but if I have a day completely to myself, I expect to put myself through some serious effort to get these goals done. Also going to build that damn Lego Phoenix. This hopefully will be the last video that is just a high quality interview, this time with the amazing Phill Smith, bookended by an intro and an outro of me standing here waffling to a camera. Let's do this for real. Let's go. Hey folks, time for this week's interview segment. Today's guest, you might know him for his excellent mentalism products and books. You might know him for his many marked decks that he's put out for himself or for other people. In particular, the Elysian Duets, which are one of the very few sets of marked decks that I can actually use with my pathetic eyesight. You might just know him as one of the many recent magicians to sport a mighty and impressive beard. We have him here today for his knowledge on marketing and branding and design. He's also in a very select group with me, Roy Coopers, as the 3 sweatshop labourers for Craig Petty between the videos that I make for him, all the decks you design, and all the coins that Roy is whittling away in his basement. Today, we have Mr. Phill Smith. Hi, Phil.
How you doing, dude? It's good to see you, man.
And yourself. So I've got you on for branding, and it's a topic I literally know nothing about. I'm hoping to just push you in the direction and get you going, because it's just not my area. I am very much not a designer. I'm not convinced I have taste in that area. I've not really got a specific brand for myself. I've just bought my website last week that needs to be designed. So let's start off with how branding is important for us as a magician. That seems like a good starting point. Why it's relevant to us in magic.
I think so. Yeah, like we were talking very briefly before we started, and you said that you don't see that you have a brand. I think one of the reasons why it's important in magic and really in like a lot of different ways is because everybody does have a brand. You know, you mentioned that you feel like you over the process of doing this project that you've ended up going in lots of different directions. But like in a way, that whole thing is part of your brand. Everything that people see about you, and every like time they think or interact with you, there's a kind of presentation that you're doing, and that presentation is the brand. And really, when we talk about doing branding, we're not talking about creating a brand. We're talking about taking control of the brand that inevitably always exists. And in magic, especially, we all sort of dipping from the same pot with what we're actually doing in terms of, you know, using playing cards or doing sponge balls, or there's a limited number of tricks. Even though there's a lot of tricks, there's still a sort of limited range of them. And branding is a part of a way of sort of imposing your personality on that in a very sort of coherent way. So I guess that's what we were going to talk about. Yeah.
So, yeah, that makes sense. So, in physical terms, what am I looking at? What do you work for people in branding? What do I need?
What you've got to think about is in terms of every time somebody has like an interaction with you, some of those interactions, when you're face to face with them, when you're performing, you are in moment by moment control of. So whether you come across as a chipper, funny person, or whether you're sort of dark and mysterious and strange and sinister, you in that moment are in control of. But when somebody's looking at your advert on the internet or Instagram or on Facebook, or when somebody's looking at your website, or if you've got a brochure or a stand for when you're doing wedding fairs, all of these other details are other moments when people are sort of interacting with or thinking about or experiencing some part of your overall sort of persona, really, as a magician. And because you're not physically speaking, presenting, performing a trick, you aren't necessarily in the same kind of control consciously as that. And so that's when you have to rely on being able to create a sort of a visual brand, which is, I think, what most of the time people mean, that reflects and is like congruent and makes sense with the actual, you know, the real like Nemed Phoenix experience that they get when you're performing. Because if you present one particular way with your visual branding and you get hired, and then when you turn up it's not consistent at all and it doesn't reflect what you're doing, then there's a little bit of what's the word, cognitive dissonance there. People be like a little bit perhaps surprised, or you want to make sure that it's a kind of seamless, kind of coherent. That's a big part of creating a brand like this.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Sorry.
So, for example, I was talking to you, I was saying I've not really got in my head a brand because I do close-up and cabaret and illusions and comedy, and I want to do all sorts of different acts. I don't really want to focus on one. I don't want to be creating the wedding magician website, for example, and narrowing myself down. So I'm just sitting here trying to think of what, if anything, I could say is coherent in me.
Well, there's a sort of an idea that you would like make your weakness your strength. That's in like Sun Tzu's Art of War. And if you feel like your weakness is that you are not focused on any individual part of magic, then perhaps the brand would be about that you are like exploring different kinds of magic or experimenting with different kinds of magic, that you are the guy who can create something all of these different spaces rather than just being down to one thing. That could be a really interesting framework if you've got the exact right angle for it to work, rather than focusing on one specific thing. That it's so difficult to describe all of these things in words, because it's often my like universe for this kind of thing is much more visual and a little bit more sort of abstracted sometimes. It takes me a little while to figure out what the exact right words are, but it would be that kind of approach. When I do these branding projects, I started doing like work like this, design and branding in industry. So it would be for corporations and companies, or if they're releasing a product or something, and there'd be something that they wanted to particularly make sure that everything's sort of coherent and everybody recognizes the product when they see it. But when you're working with a person, so much of it is down to like what that person is like, and it involves a lot of the time getting to know people. So a lot of the projects that I do, a big chunk of the very beginning of it is kind of just like figuring the person out, like exactly who they are and like what their history is or what they are bringing to the table that's uniquely them. And often it's something perhaps that the people themselves aren't almost like consciously aware of, but that it's a way of like identifying those aspects of their persona and then finding a way to incorporate it into the brand. So like on a very shallow level. So I do a lot of work with Luch. So I've done a bunch of the branding for him and worked with him on his forward-facing brand, like his outward brand as Luch, the magician or performer when he's doing corporate or wedding gigs and stuff like that. But I've also done a lot of stuff for Read My Mind, which is his company that sells stuff. And his background is in like product design. He's studied product design, and he's really into like performance cars and stuff. And so I wanted to incorporate some aspects of his visual identity that reflected that. So I used this sort of like really nice high gloss carbon fiber texture as a part of all of his branding that uses like that goes out with that. I've never really spoken to him about it, but it's a consistent feature that runs through everything. That's this kind of very oblique reference to these aspects of, you know, his persona. And so it is, because it incorporates that, almost inevitably like congruent with his persona. So often you really want to sit down and figure out what you yourself are kind of like bringing to the table that's unique, because that's going to be what gives you a commercial advantage over people who are just presenting as like Mr. Generic. Does that make sense? It's pretty weird.
I like the way your mind works, sort of trying to convert people's personalities into something that you can use like that. I have a functional example for you. That is something that I was asking people. Like, I read somewhere once you should ask 10 people what they think of you to get you an idea of how you actually appear to people. And the one consistent thing that people always say throughout whatever I'm doing is very sarcastic, dry, quick wit. How do I put that on a website? How do I convert that into a thing?
I think that it sounds like that's super nebulous, and like you think, how are you going to communicate that? But things like that are carried across by the phrase that is used is tone of voice. So if I was going to present for somebody who is a very serious person, a very like I don't know, like classical presentation, then for example, you would use a font that would kind of reflect that, and a set of colors that would reflect that. Like the visual iconography that you use would reflect that and would perhaps invoke those things. So like a classical font, for example, like Bodoni or like a Garamond or a Palatino or something like a nice old-fashioned kind of a font, and you would use more subdued colors. Whereas if somebody is a bit more like quick-witted, like you said, and a bit more humorous, a bit more quirky, a bit more irreverent, then you would use visual styling that would kind of invoke that. So it's going to be something that's less formal. You perhaps use more sort of irregular shapes and layouts. So everything wouldn't be sort of necessarily symmetrical and straight lines. You put some quirky angles into any of the graphical elements that are in there, or tilt something over to the side. You'd be able to use a font, not quite going as far as Comic Sans, okay, guys? We've still got our self-respect. But using a font which is itself more sort of irregular or quirky, and there's loads and loads of things like that. There's a website that I use called dafont.com, dafont.com, that has got loads and loads and loads of them on, like literally tens of thousands of mainly free fonts. And so if you put in ones that are kind of like quirky and irreverent, there's loads of ways using that. Like no one would make a mistake of booking somebody who's got a font that looks like the letters on a ransom note, and then when that person turns up, they're in top hat and tails and they're doing very classical manipulation. It tells a certain kind of story, and that's all of these sort of visual elements combined. And it's almost subconscious, like nobody will look at it and consciously make that understanding. But because we're surrounded by branding like all the time, like even within the frame of your image, there's branding visible in there that somebody has sat down and spent time working and thought about all of these details. And
Yeah, same
and
here.
it's something that we're sort of
Yeah.
subconsciously, primed. Yeah.
Mm, mm,
It's like music that you don't necessarily make a conscious association. You the story is told visually.
I
Yeah.
can't believe I'm going to be sitting down at a website, googling, searching for a sarcastic but modern and stylish font. It's going to be an interesting afternoon.
I mean, that kind of thing, I think, is something that I've become like very interested in. And I'm a bit of an obsessive about fonts. So I've got like, I literally on my machine, I've probably got about, I think it's about 4,000 different fonts that I've used on projects for people. And every time I use one, it just goes like into the archive somewhere because it's something that's useful. And the same with like all kinds of different elements of graphics and blocks of just different ideas and structures of things. Some of them are like resources that I can save. Some of them are just concepts that find their way back. So it's easier for me to do because I'm consciously like seeking this stuff out. But the moment that you start looking at the way that branding works, that like all of the things that you see in the shop have been designed for a very specific reason to make you feel a certain thing. So if you're looking at like in the coffee aisle, for example, like I've got a coffee machine that a drip filter machine, and it's the exact same product. It is the exact same product. Um, there's almost no difference really between all of the different brands, but there's a lot of different ones, and they've all got a brand and a design that sells a particular idea. And the reason why there's so many of them is because they know that one of them will be so precisely tailored to the kind of person that you are that will be the one that you'll choose. And it's the same in the kind of branding that you would do, is that you don't necessarily want to have something that's super duper generic because there's lots of other generic people out there. And all that you do then is you end up competing on price. Whereas what you want to do is leverage the aspects of your brand that are completely unique, that are entirely you, so that when you find the people who are like, that's it, this is the guy, look at what it says on his website, that's a sign, that people operate like that. There'll be something about it that rings a bell in their head, and they'll be like, right, this is the guy that we've got to get for that event, because there's no one else that they've looked at like 20 other people and they're all Mr. Generic, whereas this one has got something to it and it reflects a particular person. And you're not going to hit everybody with that, but the people that you do hit with that are going to be the people that are going to book you again because you have got something sort of inside that space, in that brand, that they feel speaks to them. So it's a mistake. People try and appeal to everybody in branding, in any kind of art, really. And it's kind of a mistake to do that, like commercially as well as creatively.
You really think deep about this sort of stuff. This is definitely your.
I mean, I've been doing it for a long time. So what I've done is I've managed to persuade myself that it's an actual real endeavor rather than just a man in a shed. So I've like come up with a complicated way of describing it. But
no. All right, so I'm going to sort of try something now, because I have a currently existing logo. That's basically all I have in the universe to mark me out at the moment. And I just bought my website last week off Danny Rag. I've got to at least build something and get it.
What's the URL? Say it now so everyone can go there.
nemedphoenix.co.uk.
There you go.
There's nothing there yet except a random Australian woman clip art, but it will be. It will be.
That could be your brand.
So I liked this logo when I had it designed. The guy gave me 4 choices. I'm going to show it to you, and just give me your thoughts. What does it say? What do you think about it? Is it good for me? Just, I don't know whether this will work or not, but I'm just curious to your reaction to the logo. All right, here we go. That markets me.
It's a logo. No, it's nice because it visually combines 2 different things. Phoenix, which is obviously your name, and that's something that is quite memorable, I think, that would be worth like visually referencing in whatever branding you do eventually come up with. And it's got the spade, which is a sort of immediate kind of visual reference to magic. So it kind of it sums up those 2 things. There's a few. It's not. I think the best way that I can always say these things is not necessarily whether it's good or bad. That's not what I would have come up with. And yeah, I think that there's a few different ways of coming at that kind of thing. I kind of feel like with you've got such an interesting and unique name. I would always try and build a word mark so that it's a way of presenting that visually incorporated with the logo. And it's a little bit of sometimes of a mistake if there's something that's interesting and unique like that to separate that out, especially with what we do, where the brand is almost always just going to be what your name is, because it's a personal brand rather than a normal sort of commercial brand. There's a few different ways of doing logos, and logos have changed quite a lot over the years. Back when I was first coming up, which, as you can imagine, was about 1,000,000 years ago, there was loads of important features that you'd want to have with your logo. So you'd need to make sure that it could appear easily in black and white so that it would look good in the yellow pages, or if you faxed it to somebody, then it wouldn't like... I've not sent a fax for quite a long time. So those details, so like a color logo, for example, used to be something that was very expensive. That's why the original Apple logo was 6 colors, because that was the most expensive option when Steve Jobs was looking to buy an advert in the catalog for the computer trade show, and he wanted to show that it was a premium company. Whereas nowadays, because CMYK print is standard, and often your branding might not even appear in print, it might only be online. The rules are different. You wouldn't used to have a photographic logo because it would have been ridiculous. Whereas nowadays you can do that kind of thing. So there's a lot more sort of freedom technically to do that now. So rather than having to be very, very restrictive and very prescriptive, yeah.
Apple's a perfect example of branding. That's what I want. Branding that turns me into a cult.
But I mean, those things are a kind of a perfect example, because essentially what they had to sell was not the technology, but the dream. That's always been what made Apple so successful in comparison to companies like Microsoft or Hewlett Packard, Dell, or the people who were competing with them at the time. Is they were selling computers, whereas Apple was selling like this dream of sort of creativity and freedom. But the phrase that they used was, it's not how powerful the computer is, it's how powerful it makes you. So they were trying to sell this idea beyond the thing. Like you said, it's a great exercise in branding. It's one of the biggest sort of success stories of all of those things. Yeah. But all of these big companies that are successful have got this very strong, very coherent brand ideal, and part of the reason why it's so successful is because you hit with it so much, like Nike with that swoosh thing that they've got, and their tagline, "Just do it," which is almost more important to the brand than the name of the brand. Like it's that "just do it" is more iconic and speaks more about what the brand ideals are than the word Nike, which just means nothing really.
So anyone who really knows how to pronounce it.
Not Nike. What was it? Porsche, IKEA, Skoda. They keep changing them around.
So I have got these things to think about. How out of curiosity, what does a person who's not me, basically someone who has what's the word I'm thinking of, any money, get you to do branding for them? How does that come about? When was your last?
Probably the big project that I worked on most recently for branding was my friend Peter Antonio, who is a mentalist from the UK who has traveled over to the States. He did America's Got Talent, did pretty well in that, but didn't win it. And he's currently doing a tour. So he wanted to kind of reinvent his brand so that it felt very modern and fresh, so that when he went out and did his tour, it would be something that was quite striking, that people would see a poster of at a venue which probably would have a lot of upcoming events and posters, and then people will see and think, wait a second, what's that? So that's a bit of a cheat, because I've known Peter for a long time. I don't really have a huge amount of like sitting down and wondering what the unique things about him are. But he just, whilst I was talking to him, he just kind of come off of quite a long period of working in Las Vegas, working with Shin Lim, because he was filling in on the Limitless show, which is the Shin Lim's stage show in Las Vegas. And I kind of wanted to reflect that visually. So we kind of were leaning into this idea of like a neon sign, and that popped up somewhere else in this other idea of like a psychic who's got a shop in a strip mall or something in America. This sort of cheesy backstreet psychic might have like a sign on the door that was neon. And so we were working with this idea of neon graphics. So that was an element that kept coming back in. And we incorporated aspects of some sort of tarot and bits and pieces to create this overall like really quite punchy aesthetic. If you guys Google like Peter Antonio US tour, then you'll be able to see an example of what I'm talking about. And we used a lot of he got photography because he was coming off doing AGT. We wanted to reference that, and obviously it's important for there to be a strong image of him so that people can I remember that guy. So the whole thing had to be almost like explosively visual, which isn't really necessarily how he is. So that one we had to tailor a little bit more to be fitting in with what the expectations of the market were, which is the less interesting and less exciting side, because it had to be, you know, on all kinds of, on Instagram, all across Facebook. He's going to have to be promoting loads of stuff, like I said, posters in the venues and things. But that was quite an interesting one to work on, and it seems like it is going okay. His tour seems like it's working, so it wasn't a complete disaster, at least.
Well, I imagine you sort of have to pick and choose who you work for. To get someone you're going to get an idea for, something you can feel you can work with.
Yeah, I try and work with people that have got. I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Like, if you can't connect with somebody, not just what I'm doing, but anywhere in business, sometimes there'll be people where you just, there's nothing wrong with what the proposition is, but you're not sure that you're the right person for it because you don't connect with it. And especially, I think, if you're trying to find a way to use your connection with somebody to communicate their values, if you don't connect with them very well, then it can be a bit difficult to do. Because if somebody's very standoffish and they want to be very businesslike, the way that I work isn't really work with that, because I have to get inside someone's skin a little bit to understand where they're coming from. So I have to, be able to interact like that with people. I've been doing a few projects recently which weren't like branding projects, but in terms of doing like consulting and designing some tricks for people. And so much of the early stage of it, I think that when I first started in magic, I would have been asking like what their favorite tricks were, what their favorite method were. Whereas now it's much more sort of abstracted and about like, what their background is, what other things they're interested in, and what aspects from different parts of their life they can draw in to try and create something that's uniquely them. And they kind of do the same thing with branding, that it's really about kind of in some way just figuring out what somebody's all about and finding a way to visually project that so people can immediately see an image, an icon, a logo, a text, a web page, a business card, and get maybe 5% of an idea of like, kind of, I get a feeling I know what this guy's all about. So if I book him, I know what I'm going to expect.
And so if you guys, that sounds like someone you'd like to work with and you can afford him, contact him through the website. I'll put his link for his website below, as usual. It's where all his mentalism products are that are also definitely worthwhile.
I'm very easy to reach. I'm not a very formal businessman in that regard. So if somebody can just reach out, I'm sure it'll be pretty easy for them to find me.
So Phill, what are some of the common branding mistakes that people make, so we can get some useful information out to the people?
There's quite a few, I think.
Can I just start with playing card ties? Let's get that out of the way.
The thing is, any of those things, anything that's sort of weird and that's an obvious mistake, if you do it intentionally, can work really well. So those things with the right character, anything that you think is too silly or too cheesy or wrong, there's a way of doing it. And a lot of it comes down to sort of like being intentional about it. Like, people wear those things and do those things because they've not really thought about it. It's okay to do quirky or offbeat things like that, as long as you've got a reason why you want to do it. You feel like it reflects you. I think probably the most common mistake that I see is people are selling somebody who isn't them, really, that they've never really been able to sort of look at themselves and think about what people get when they turn up, or how they present, or how they want to present, or how they can adjust how they present. And they've got a website or a brand that is one thing because they think that's what's going to sell, and they don't really understand that what they're selling is actually this. So even if this is good and that's what people want and they hire them, then they get this. Even if this is good, it's because it's a disappointment, or because it's different from what their expectation is. They won't be able to appreciate the full value of it. as part of branding is not just about appealing to get bookers in, but to appealing to the right kind of person, somebody who's going to appreciate the stuff that you're doing that's unique. So it's about that kind of like accuracy or authenticity, so that you are delivering what people want. And there will always be somebody who wants whatever peculiarity is, as long as you're not terrible, they deliver. But you've got to make sure that that's what you're pitching, that that's what you're selling. If you go into, there's a really weird magazine shop near me with all these weird magazines from everywhere around the world. There's a massive section on weddings. And quite a few of them are magazines specifically for alternative weddings. So if you're like a goth, or if you're into like super obscure, like pagan spirituality, there's like a magazine full of all kinds of suppliers who supply that aspect of the industry. Now, most of these wedding suppliers are very sort of generic, middle of the road, because there's a specific, there's just a wedding aesthetic. Whereas these companies have got quite tailored products for this market, and their branding that reflect that. Whereas if they had an advert in one of those magazines that was like a very generic wedding advert, no one's going to call them. If they put that advert in a normal wedding magazine, then they're going to end up getting hired for a normal wedding, and they turn up with all of their goth stuff. And even though that stuff's awesome and great, the people won't appreciate it, and vice versa. So if you've got this specific product, and we all have as magicians, because we've all got our own way of coming at the art, of approaching it, how we present. You know, you mentioned that you've got this sort of like quite acerbic, sarcastic character, that there are people who love that. People love like watching Jimmy Carr rip the nuts off a heckler. It's about finding a way to like be true to who you actually are and what you're presenting, and being able to pitch that so that people who are looking for that can find it. I think that's the big mistake, is in just like not being like accurate, authentic in who they really are. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah. Are there any others? Any other obvious ones?
Any like real car crash ones? There was, I think, following the trend is one of them as well. So the great example of that is that there's a font called, back to fonts, there's a font called Bleeding Cowboys, which is this really weird gothic damaged font with swirls and slightly calligraphic. And for about 5 to 10 years, every magician had this font, because it was a bit retro, a bit underground. It had a really nice aesthetic. Nothing wrong with the font, but it just got overdone, and people were using it because they liked it, because they'd seen it on loads of other people's websites. But that's a colossal mistake, because you want to be unique. You don't want people to look at this website and be like, have we looked at this guy already? Like, this just looks very familiar, so often when people see that there's a trend that's forming, their initial instinct is, because of the social proof, to follow that trend. You kind of, especially because of what we do, that it's so unique doing magic, when you see a trend forming, it does like inform you as to what you should do. And it's usually something in a completely different direction from whatever that trend is, so that you do stand out. Look, we talk about branding in the supermarket, but we mentioned it earlier on about like we're surrounded by it. Sometimes you'll see branding that stands out because it's very visually sort of detailed and colorful, in a field where all of the other products are very flat and staid, or they use minimalist coloring or something like that. But in the coffee section, they're all very vivid and colorful, because they want to invoke this almost like tropical feel of this international sense of this coffee. And there's one brand that is like a Japanese brand, and it's completely white, very minimal fonts. And so by being like not loud, by not being brash, it stands out from what everybody else is doing. So what everybody else is doing sometimes can give you a very good indication of the direction that you shouldn't be going in, because you don't want to be where everyone else is in that sense, visually. Because then you're competing with them. Does that make sense? I think it makes
sense. Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to the next section, have you got, are those the big mistakes? Are there any tiny little things that we can come on, drag them out, give me all the mistakes.
Yeah, yeah, one of the other things as well is, if you if you make your brand too specific to a particular like time stylistically. So if there's a particular, again, I guess this is the same thing, that if there's a particular visual style that's very popular at the time, you can end up getting locked into it. So I think that this visual style that I did for Peter Antonio, only some of it will be useful for him after this tour is done, because it's so stylistically locked to the tour, and all of the tour stuff is a particular aesthetic. So when this tour is done, the color scheme that we've used and the way that it's been presented kind of needs to change a little bit. So we can keep with the neon, but shift it around and make it a little bit more generic. So yeah, so that's not so much necessarily a mistake, but it kind of comes down again to what is the current thing and why perhaps that's not always the best way to do it, because you don't want things to look like old fashioned. Sometimes designs are quite sort of timeless, but other times they can be like effective in the moment, but then they age quite quickly. I think that some of these tools and some of the things that I've been working on recently, they're great now, like this thing for Peter Antonio, because it is like a live thing. But I suspect that in about 10 years' time, I'll look at it and be like, nah, I don't like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you, Phill, are a very, very busy, high-end man working on American's Got Talent people. And also you've probably got at least another 10, 12 Craig Petty decks to design the backs for.
That's it.
So let's assume we can't get you. What does the ordinary everyday magician physically, practically do right now to help themselves out with their branding? What can we do?
It used to be quite difficult to do all of this stuff because it relied on having very like expensive and complicated tools. But increasingly, these things have been becoming more and more usable for normal people. And a lot of the way that like companies do branding now are focused on the tools that normal people will be able to use. So Instagram and TikTok and Facebook even nowadays, you'll find a lot of people won't have a personal website because people are, they're on those platforms, and that's really all the reach that they need because of how it works. So I think that the most important thing that you want to do is lock down your username on all of the big platforms. So if you want to get a TikTok account, even if you don't use TikTok, the people you want to sell to might. Instagram, Facebook, MySpace, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, all of these, you want to make sure that your username is registered on them. And that way you retain control, because essentially, like I said, this is about being able to control how people perceive you. And the worst thing would be if somebody else who's got a similar name to you or who just wants to mess with you registers your name on one of them, and you end up having to have a name with like some underscores and a 1 or something at the end, because it feels a little bit less confidence inspiring for clients. So make sure that they're all registered. And the key thing that you want to have is a consistent presence across all of these different things, because really consistency is what makes these things create a sense of trust. Like if you were driving out in the middle of the night and you needed to fill your car up with petrol, and there was a Shell petrol station, but the logo was different and Shell was written in a different font, and like the colors were different, you wouldn't be filled with confidence that is like legit. You want to have this sense that it is a seamless interaction with a person or with a organization that you have faith in, that you can trust, and kind of that like coherence and being the same across all the platforms. So even if you just have a relatively simple kind of a logo, and you can use tools like Adobe Express or find a designer or somebody who will be able to assist you with this. The internet is full of millions of different tools that enable people to come up with something to put some kind of a stick in the ground. Even if what you do is very simple, as long as it feels like it's consistent across everything, then you are exerting that control and you are being able to make sure that people, when they interact with you or on any one of these different platforms, is having a consistent experience. And again, that's like part of this aspect of being able to control and manifest it. If they all look different and a little bit scatty, then the message that people are going to take away from that is that you're not particularly organized. They won't necessarily consciously feel that, but it imbues trust. And I think that that's probably one of the main things that people could do, is just try and make sure that they gain control of all of those things. If you are using one of these tools and there's, like I said, there's loads of different mechanisms online now to do this, to create some kind of visual identity. I would always say, unless you're a technical specialist or that you've got a very clear idea about what you want, is to try and keep it as simple as possible, and not try and do anything particularly clever, which sounds, because when you're working on these things, if you're using a new piece of software, or if you're getting into doing some kind of visual design for your own purposes, for your own branding, your instinct will be that you come up with a clever way of doing something and think, that's really cool. But often that means that you're kind of overreaching, and that what you like about it is the fact that it was difficult for you to do. And you're right to be proud to have done it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing for your branding. So try and keep it simple. Pick a nice sort of color scheme. You can pick color schemes quite well. If you've got a photograph that you like, if you pick like 4 colors from that photograph, the magic of they will always work together. Those colors will work together because they exist in that image. And it could be a photograph of absolutely anything, but just something maybe that you feel represents your brand. So that's quite a nice way of pulling those threads together. When you're presenting your brand, one of the things that people do quite often is that they will have picked a font that they like for their like logo type, or their logo, or their name at the top of the website, or their title on Facebook. And then when they write the text on their website, or if they're using WordPress or Wix or something like that, they'll use that font. And that's not a great idea. If there's like an interesting font, you shouldn't use it for the body text, the main text of your letters, newsletters, website, Instagram posts, or anything like that, because they're usually harder to read. Make those bits a bit easier. Kind of like keep it simple is my main recommendation to people. Get comfortable coming up with a few different ideas. Treat yourself as though you're a client. Mind map what it is that you want to hit. Use a website like Dafont or Adobe Express or something like that to be able to see what's available to represent that. And then like try and keep a clean look. I think that is a good word to describe what you're looking for. Is if you have branding that looks like crisp and clean, it will go a long way to representing you in a very professional way, rather than one which is really clever, but it's a little bit scatty, a little bit messy, unless that's what you're shooting for, in which case it might be quite tricky to exactly hit.
Okay, Phil, I think we've got some pretty good information out of you there. As always on the channel, we drag some information out of our interviewees.
I've said too much.
You're a busy man, and I have got to go and spend 2 to 3 hours trying to find a sarcastic but skillful font. So we're going to let you go. I'm going to put your details below. Everyone should go and check out your stuff. Buy your illusion duets so they become more common cards around, and I can keep using them. Thanks very much. Anyone wants to get in touch, you know how to get in touch with him. He's on Facebook. Go to the website. Links below.
Perfect. Thanks
Very much, Phil. Cheers. And that's your lot for this week. Short but sweet interview. See you next week, hopefully with some actual vlog footage and some actual progress on my actual goals. I bought a sad little belty carry case for the camera so that I can actually take it around with me and try and get used to filming what I'm doing. Fingers crossed. See you next week. Oh, and subscribe, follow, click the bell, like, leave some comments. Love the comments. Again, see you next week.